Welcome to Marple Whispers. I'm Sean, and here every whisper hides a mystery. These Miss Marple stories are my own creations, written just for you. So lean in and let the clues begin. In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a single gunshot shatters the calm, plunging Vicar Leonard Clement into a web of secrets and lies. Colonel Protheroe, a despised tyrant, is found dead in the vicarage study, shot with a silenced pistol, a tampered clock sowing confusion. As suspects multiply, from a vengeful poacher to a restless wife and her artist lover, only Miss Jane Marple's keen eye sees through the deception. Chapter 1. The Village of St. Mary Mead. I have no hesitation in saying that the village of St. Mary Mead is one of those places where nothing ever seems to happen, at least not on the surface. It lies in the county of Downshire, about 12 miles from the bustling town of Much Benham, and boasts a population that hovers around the 200 mark, give or take a few seasonal visitors. The high street winds lazily from the church at one end to the railway station at the other, flanked by cottages with thatched roofs and gardens, bursting with hollyhocks and delphiniums in summer. It's the sort of spot where one might expect life to unfold in a series of gentle routines. Morning services, afternoon calls, and evening bridge parties. But as I, Leonard Clement, the vicar of St. Mary Mead, have come to learn, beneath that placid exterior simmers a cauldron of human passions, rivalries, and secrets that could rival any metropolis. My own household contributes its share to the village's eccentricities. I am a man of middle age, inclined to scholarly pursuits and a quiet pipe by the fire, but married to Griselda, who is 20 years my junior, and possesses a spirit as lively as her name suggests. She dresses in the latest London fashions, slashed skirts and cloche hats that raise eyebrows among the more conservative parishioners, and has a habit of inviting all manner of unconventional guests to tea. "Len, darling," she says with her infectious laugh, "life's too short for stuffiness." Our maid, Mary, a sturdy girl from the nearby farms, manages the vicarage with a combination of efficiency and muttered complaints about modern goings-on. It's a happy home, all things considered, though not without its domestic skirmishes. Dominating the parish like a feudal lord is Colonel Lucius Protheroe, who resides at Old Hall, a sprawling Georgian manor set amid manicured lawns and ancient oaks. The colonel, retired from the Indian Army, is a man of imposing build, with a mustache that bristles like a hedgehog and a voice that carries across the cricket green during vestry meetings. He serves as church warden, a role he approaches with the zeal of a drill sergeant, forever haranguing me about the state of the organ fund or the laxity of Sunday attendance. "Discipline, Clement, that's what's lacking," he thunders, as if the congregation were a regiment of raw recruits. His wealth comes from unspecified investments, and he dispenses it with a parsimony that borders on meanness, much to the chagrin of local charities. The colonel's family adds further color to the canvas. His second wife, Anne, is a woman of striking beauty, with dark hair swept into an elegant chignon and eyes that hold a perpetual shadow of melancholy. She is considerably younger than her husband, rumor has it by nearly 2 decades, and moves through village society with a grace that speaks of finer breeding. Yet there's a restlessness about her, a way she glances toward the horizon during garden fetes, as if yearning for escape. Their daughter, Lettuce, a willowy girl of 18, inherits her mother's looks, but none of her reserve. She's flighty, fond of tennis parties and the latest dance records, and often clashes with her father's authoritarian ways. Not far from the vicarage lives Miss Jane Marple in a neat cottage called Mead, where the lace curtains are always spotless and the brass knocker gleams. Miss Marple is one of those elderly ladies who seem to have been born old, with fluffy white hair, china blue eyes, and a figure as delicate as a bird. She spends her days knitting intricate patterns, scarves for nephews, mittens for the church bazaar, and tending her garden, where the roses are the envy of the county. But it's her mind that's truly remarkable, sharp as a needle, with an insight into human nature that borders on the uncanny. "My dear vicar," she once said to me over tea, her voice soft and deceptively mild, "people are so very much alike wherever one goes. The same virtues, the same follies." Her nephew, Raymond West, a successful novelist from London, visits occasionally and teases her about her village parallels. But I've seen her unravel knots of gossip that would baffle a Scotland Yard detective. The rest of St. Mary Mead's inhabitants form a tapestry of types one might find in any English hamlet. There's Mrs. Price Ridley, the widow who rules the Women's Institute with an iron fist and collects scandals, like others collect stamps. Dr. Haydock, our genial physician, pedals about on his bicycle, dispensing pills and common sense in equal measure. The archaeologist Dr. Stone and his enthusiastic secretary, Miss Cram, have taken up residence at the Blue Boar Inn, excavating a barrow on the Colonel's land and stirring up talk of buried treasures. Then there's Lawrence Redding, the young artist who's rented the old studio beyond the churchyard. He's handsome, with a shock of auburn hair and a bohemian air that sets tongues wagging, especially when he's seen sketching Mrs. Protheroe in the meadows. On this particular July afternoon, as I sat in my study preparing next Sunday's sermon on charity, a topic inspired, ironically, by the Colonel's latest refusal to contribute to the roof repairs, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. Griselda had just returned from a shopping expedition in Much Benham, her arms laden with parcels, and was regaling Mary with tales of the latest hats. Outside, the sun baked the thatch, and bees droned lazily among the honeysuckle. Yet there was an undercurrent, a faint ripple in the village calm. Whispers had reached me of the Colonel's quarrel with Dr. Stone over access to the dig site, something about trespassing and legal threats. And earlier, at the post office, I'd overheard Mrs. Price Ridley murmuring about that Redding fellow and his improper attentions. Little did I suspect, as I dipped my pen into the inkwell, that these threads of discord were weaving themselves into a pattern of tragedy. St. Mary Mead, for all its sleepy charm, was about to reveal its darker side. Chapter 2. An Unwelcome Guest. It was one of those evenings in St. Mary Mead when the summer light lingered long after the church bells had chimed for evensong, casting a golden hue over the vicarage garden and turning the climbing roses into fiery sentinels against the stone walls. I had been looking forward to a quiet supper with Griselda, perhaps discussing her latest enthusiasm for redecorating the drawing room in what she called Art Deco style, a notion that filled me with mild apprehension. But fate, or rather Colonel Protheroe, had other plans. Earlier that day, a note had arrived from Old Hall, penned in the Colonel's decisive hand. "My dear Clement, I shall dine with you this evening at 7. Urgent church matters to discuss. Protheroe." There was no invitation in it, merely a statement of intent, as if the vicarage were an extension of his own domain. Griselda, upon reading it over my shoulder, had laughed her merry laugh. The old tyrant. Well, Len, you'll have to endure it. I'll make sure Mary puts on a good show, roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, I think, and invite Anne, too. Poor thing, she looks so trapped these days. I agreed, though inwardly I sighed. The colonel was not a man one relished as a guest. His presence turned any meal into a battlefield of opinions and admonitions. As 7 o'clock approached, I paced the study, glancing at the clock on the mantel. The room was my sanctuary. Bookshelves lined with theological tomes and a few well-thumbed detective novels for lighter moments, a worn leather armchair by the window overlooking the lane, and the desk where I composed my sermons. Today, however, it felt oppressive, the air thick with anticipation of the impending intrusion. Griselda bustled in, her fair hair pinned up in a casual knot, wearing a dress of soft blue silk that accentuated her youthful figure. "Don't look so glum, darling," she teased, adjusting my collar. "It's only dinner, not the Spanish Inquisition." I smiled despite myself. Her irreverence was a balm to my more somber nature. The sound of gravel crunching under tires announced their arrival. Through the window, I saw the colonel's Bentley pull up, its polished chrome gleaming in the fading sun. He emerged first, tall and ramrod straight, his tweed suit immaculate, the inevitable cigar clamped between his teeth. Anne followed, stepping out with a grace that seemed almost reluctant, her hand lightly on his arm. She wore a simple evening gown of pale green, which suited her olive complexion and the dark waves of her hair, but her expression was distant, as if her thoughts were elsewhere. Lettuce, I noted, was absent, probably off at some dance or tennis party, evading her father's watchful eye. I opened the door myself, Mary being occupied in the kitchen. "Colonel, Mrs. Protheroe." "Welcome," I said, striving for warmth. The colonel nodded curtly, removing his hat. "Evening, Clement. Hope we're not putting you out." His tone suggested he didn't much care if they were. Anne offered a small smile, her eyes meeting mine briefly before darting away. "Thank you for having us, Vicar. It's kind of you." Her voice was low and musical, with a hint of something foreign. French, perhaps, from her mother's side, as village rumor had it. We moved to the drawing room, where Griselda greeted them with her usual effervescence. "Colonel, how splendid to see you. And Anne, that dress is divine. Wherever did you find it?" Anne murmured something about a London trip, but the colonel cut in, settling into the best armchair without invitation. "No time for fripperies, Mrs. Clement. We've business to attend to, but it can wait till after dinner. How's the parish fund shaping up? I hear collections are down again." I exchanged a glance with Griselda. The evening's tone was set. Dinner was served in the dining room, a cozy space with oak panels and a table set with our best china. Griselda's insistence. Mary, her cap slightly askew from the haste, brought in the soup first, a clear consommé that the colonel eyed suspiciously. "Hope it's not too fancy, Clement." "Plain food for plain folk, that's my motto." He slurped it noisily, then launched into his critique. "Now, about those church accounts. I've been going over the books. Your oversight is slipping, man. The organ repair fund is short by £20, and that new hymn book purchase was extravagant. Standards must be upheld." I nodded patiently, spooning my soup with deliberate slowness. Inwardly, I seethed. The colonel had a way of making one feel like a schoolboy caught in mischief. "The hymn books were necessary, Colonel. The old ones were falling apart, and the congregation appreciates the clearer print." He harumphed, waving his spoon. Appreciates. Half of them can't read properly anyway. And that curate of yours, Hawes, what's he up to? Skulking about like a ghost. I caught him arguing with Archer the poacher last week. Unsavory associations, if you ask me. Griselda attempted levity, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Oh, Colonel, Mr. Hawes is harmless, nervous as a kitten, but devoted. And Archer? Well, every village needs its rogues. Tell us about your dig, instead. Dr. Stone says it's yielding Roman artifacts. How? Exciting! The Colonel puffed up slightly, pleased to shift to a topic where he held authority. Ah, the barrow. Yes, Stone's making progress, though he's a slippery fellow, insists on more funding, cheek of the man. But if there's treasure, it'll benefit the estate. Anne, who had been silent, stirred. Lucius, it's not about treasure, it's history. Her tone was mild, but there was an edge, quickly masked. As the roast beef arrived, carved to perfection by Mary, the conversation veered unpredictably. The Colonel dominated, railing against modern laxity. Young people today, no discipline. Look at Lettuce, wants a motor car of her own. Nonsense, Griselda chuckled. But Colonel, motors are the future. I adore driving, zipping along the lanes like a bird. He glared at her. Future? Rubbish. Horses were good enough for my father. Anne's gaze drifted to the window, where the twilight deepened, and a faint light glowed from Lawrence Redding's studio across the fields. It was a modest building, once a barn, now converted with skylights for his painting. I wondered idly what drew her attention there. Perhaps the peace of it, away from her husband's bluster. I tried to steer toward gentler waters. Mrs. Protheroe, how is your garden faring? The roses at Old Hall are legendary. She turned back, her sad eyes lighting briefly. They're thriving, thank you. I've been experimenting with new varieties, hybrid teas from France. The Colonel snorted. Waste of time. Practical crops, that's what we need, not flowers. Anne's lips tightened, but she said nothing, picking at her food. Griselda, sensing the tension, chattered on about village events, the upcoming fete, the Women's Institute Bazaar. And Miss Marple's knitting stall, always a highlight. She's a wizard with patterns. The mention of Miss Marple prompted a rare agreement from the Colonel. Sharp old bird, that one, doesn't miss much. Indeed, I thought, she doesn't. Our dessert, apple tart with cream, arrived, and the Colonel mellowed slightly under its influence, though he couldn't resist one last jab. Clement, about tomorrow. I'll be back at 6 sharp for a private word in your study. Those accounts won't sort themselves. I assented wearily, the evening's strain beginning to tell. As coffee was served in the drawing-room, Anne excused herself briefly, stepping out to the garden for air. Through the French windows, I saw her silhouette against the dusk, gazing toward that distant light. The Protheroes departed around 9, the Bentley's engine roaring into the night. Griselda flopped onto the sofa with a dramatic sigh. What a bore he is. Poor Anne. Married to that, it's a wonder she doesn't run away. I murmured agreement, but my mind replayed the evening. The Colonel's domineering ways, Anne's distraction, the unspoken undercurrents. Little did I know how prophetic Griselda's words would prove. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the sort of day that makes one grateful for rural life. I rose early, as was my habit, and after breakfast attended to parish duties, a visit to old Mrs. Baker, who was ailing, and a chat with the sexton about grave maintenance. By afternoon, the village was abuzz with its usual rhythms. The baker's cart trundling down the high street, children playing hopscotch outside the school. I returned to the vicarage for tea, where Griselda informed me of the latest gossip gleaned from her calls. But it was Miss Marple who truly dissected the previous evening's events. She had taken tea with Mrs. Price Ridley and a few others at the latter's cottage, a prim affair with chintz curtains and an overabundance of doilies. Miss Marple, seated in her customary spot by the window, her knitting needles clicking steadily, listened as the ladies chattered. Mrs. Price Ridley, a formidable woman with a bosom like a ship's prow and a voice to match, held court. I heard all about it from my maid, who knows the vicarage girl. The colonel was in fine form, bullying poor Mr. Clement over the church funds, and Mrs. Protheroe, distracted as a cat on hot bricks, kept staring out the window, they say. Miss Hartnell, another of the circle, a thin, angular spinster with a passion for missionary work, nodded vigorously. It's that artist, mark my words, Lawrence Redding, painting her portrait indeed. Hours alone in that studio, what can they be thinking? Miss Weatherby, milder and more romantic, sighed. He's very handsome, you know, those eyes, like a poet's, and Anne Protheroe is still young. The colonel must be twice her age. Mrs. Price Ridley leaned forward conspiratorially. Scandalous, that's what it is. I wouldn't be surprised if there's more to it. Remember the Limes affair years ago? Started with portraits, ended in divorce. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her blue eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. She set down her knitting, an intricate shawl in soft wool, and sipped her tea. Human nature is so very consistent, she remarked softly. One sees the same patterns everywhere. In my youth, there was a similar situation with young Eliza Cartwright and the traveling painter. Such passion, but it led to nothing but sorrow. The ladies leaned in, eager for details, but Miss Marple deftly turned the conversation. Tell me more about Mrs. Protheroe's demeanor. Was she truly so absent? Oh, yes, Mrs. Price Ridley affirmed, and the colonel announced he'd return today for a meeting in the study, at 6 precisely, bossing the vicar about in his own home. Miss Hartnell clucked her tongue. The man's a tyrant. No wonder half the village despises him. Even Dr. Stone was complaining at the post office. Says Protheroe's threatening to halt the dig over some boundary dispute, Miss Weatherby added. And that poacher Archer was released yesterday. Swore vengeance, they say. Spotted him lurking near Old Hall. Miss Marple's mind catalogued these tidbits, her thoughts drifting to parallels from St. Mary Mead's past. The jealous husband, the clandestine lover, the simmering grudges. She recalled Eliza's story in vivid detail, the stolen meetings, the whispered promises, the tragic end when passion turned to despair. So like Anne Protheroe, she mused inwardly. That look in her eyes, I've seen it before. Aloud, she said, one mustn't jump to conclusions, of course, but it's curious how motives accumulate around certain people. As tea concluded, Miss Marple walked home slowly, her basket over her arm, observing the village with her keen gaze. Children scampered past, a dog barked at a passing cyclist, and in the distance, the church spire pierced the sky like a watchful finger. She paused at her gate, glancing toward the vicarage. The colonel's car would arrive soon, she knew, for that fateful appointment. Poor man, she thought, though without much sympathy. He courts trouble like a moth to flame. Inside Dane Mead, she resumed her knitting, but her mind wove a different pattern, one of suspicion and impending doom. Back at the vicarage, as the clock ticked towards 6, I prepared my study for the colonel's visit. The accounts lay spread on the desk, figures neatly tallied despite his accusations. Griselda had gone out to call on friends, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The evening before replayed in my mind. Anne's distant gaze, the light from Redding's studio, like a beacon. Was there something there? Village gossip often exaggerated, but smoke without fire was rare in St. Mary Mead. The sound of the Bentley's approach shattered my reverie. Colonel Protheroe strode in, alone this time, his face set in determined lines. "Clement," he barked without preamble, "we've much to discuss. Shut the door." I complied, settling into my chair as he paced. "First, the funds. Irregularities, man. And that Hawes fellow, I suspect embezzlement." His words flowed like a torrent, accusations flying thick and fast. I defended as best I could, but his temper mounted. "Damn it, Standards," he roared, slamming a fist on the desk. It was then that the unexpected happened, or rather, didn't. But that's for later. At that moment, as he ranted, I couldn't know that this unwelcome guest was sealing his own fate, nor that the threads of motive, jealousy, resentment, desperation were tightening around him like a noose. The afternoon wore on, and as I sat in my study after the colonel had left his ultimatum and departed, I reflected on the undercurrents in our quiet village. St. Mary Mead seemed so serene, yet beneath the surface lurked the same frailties as in any grand city: ambition, love, hatred. Anne Protheroe's sad eyes haunted me. What secrets did they hold? And Redding, talented, charming, but with a restless air. I recalled seeing him at the fete, sketching villagers with quick, sure strokes, his attention lingering on Anne. Griselda returned as dusk fell, her cheeks flushed from walking. "Any news, Len? Did the colonel behave?" I recounted the meeting briefly, omitting my deeper musings. "He's impossible," she declared. "If I were Anne, I'd poison his tea." We laughed, but the jest hung oddly in the air. Dinner that night was simple, cold meats and salad, and we retired early, the vicarage settling into silence. Meanwhile, at Old Hall, Anne Protheroe stood by her bedroom window, the house dark save for her lamp. The colonel had retired to his study, poring over maps of the estate. Her thoughts strayed to Lawrence, to their stolen moments in the studio, the scent of oil paints and turpentine mingling with whispered vows. Tomorrow, she thought, a plan forming in her mind, born of desperation. Across the fields, in his studio, Lawrence paced, a pistol gleaming on his workbench, not for art, but for darker purpose. In her cottage, Miss Marple set aside her knitting as the clock struck 10. The village lights winked out one by one, but sleep eluded her. "Something's brewing," she murmured to the empty room, like that summer with Eliza, passion and folly. She rose, drawing the curtains, her mind alert to the invisible web encircling St. Mary Mead. The night deepened, stars pricking the velvet sky, and in the vicarage I dreamed uneasily of shadowed figures and muffled shots. Little did I suspect that the morrow would bring not just discussion, but death. Chapter 3. Motives in the Air. The morning after Colonel Protheroe's domineering visit to the vicarage dawned with a deceptive tranquility that belied the storm gathering over St. Mary Mead. The sun rose over the rolling Downshire hills, gilding the thatched roofs and casting long shadows across the dew-kissed meadows. From my study window, I could see the village stirring. the milk cart rattling down the lane, Mrs. Price Ridley's maid sweeping the front step, and the distant figure of Dr. Haydock pedaling his bicycle toward a patient's cottage. It was the sort of scene that ought to inspire serenity, yet an inexplicable unease gnawed at me as I sipped my morning tea, the memory of the Colonel's bluster still fresh. Griselda, ever the antidote to my brooding, breezed into the breakfast room, her fair hair catching the light like a halo. "Len, you look as if you've swallowed a sermon on Judgment Day," she teased, helping herself to toast. Was the Colonel that dreadful last night? I recounted his tirade about the church accounts and his suspicions about Mr. Hawes, our nervous young curate, who seemed perpetually on the verge of collapse under the weight of his duties. "Poor Hawes," Griselda said, spreading marmalade with a flourish. "He's no match for Protheroe's bellowing, but honestly, Len, the man's got half the village in a tizzy. I heard at the post office that he's threatening to evict old Mrs. Archer's son, Bill, the poacher, for trespassing again." This was news to me, though not surprising. Bill Archer, a wiry man with a penchant for snares and a grudge against authority, had clashed with the Colonel before. Protheroe's estate, Old Hall, encompassed vast woodlands where game was plentiful, and Archer's poaching had long been a thorn in his side. "The Colonel mentioned no such thing last night," I said, frowning. "But he did seem in a particularly foul mood, and Anne, Mrs. Protheroe, was quieter than usual, distracted almost." Griselda's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Oh, Len, you're so innocent. Everyone's talking about her and that artist, Lawrence Redding. Mrs. Price Ridley swears she saw them together in his studio, and not just for painting, if you catch my drift." I raised an eyebrow, accustomed to my wife's flair for gossip, though I couldn't entirely dismiss it. Lawrence Redding, the young painter who had taken up residence in the converted barn beyond the churchyard, was a figure of fascination in St. Mary Mead. His auburn hair and easy charm drew admiring glances from the younger set, and his portraits, vivid, almost daring in their modernity, had earned him a modest reputation in London circles. That he was painting Anne Protheroe's portrait was common knowledge. That their sessions might involve more than brushstrokes was the kind of speculation that thrived in village parlors. As I made my way to the church for morning prayers, the air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and the hum of bees. St. Mary Mead was alive with its daily dramas, and I sensed them coalescing around the Colonel like iron filings to a magnet. At the church gate, I encountered Mr. Hawes, his thin face paler than usual, his hands twisting a handkerchief as if it were his lifeline. "Good morning, Vicar," he stammered. I hope all's well after last night's dinner." His eyes darted nervously, as if expecting the Colonel to materialize. "Well enough," I replied, studying him. Hawes was a well-meaning soul, but his timidity made him an easy target for Protheroe's criticisms. "The Colonel was his usual self, I'm afraid. He mentioned you, something about your recent sermon on forgiveness. He didn't approve." Hawes flushed crimson. "He called it sentimental nonsense, said I was undermining discipline, but I only meant to offer comfort." His voice cracked, and I patted his shoulder, sensing deeper troubles. "Don't take it to heart, Hawes. He finds fault with everyone." But as the curate scurried off, I wondered if Protheroe's accusations about unsavory associations held any truth. My next stop was the village shop, where I intended to pick up a tin of tobacco. The shop, run by the garrulous Mrs. Leach, was a hub of local intelligence, its shelves stocked with everything from biscuits to gossip. As I entered, I found myself in the midst of a lively exchange. Mrs. Leach, her round face flushed with excitement, was holding forth to Miss Weatherby, the romantic spinster who lived near the school. "I'm telling you, it's a disgrace that Bill Archer was in the Blue Boar last night, drunk as a lord, swearing he'd have his revenge on the colonel. Said Protheroe had him locked up for nothing, 3 months in Much Benham jail." Miss Weatherby, clutching her shopping basket, gasped. "Oh, but surely he wouldn't do anything rash, though I must say the colonel's been beastly to him, and to others. Why, Lettice Protheroe was in here yesterday, buying ribbon, and she said her father's cut her allowance again, wants her to marry that dull Mr. Prescott from London, but she's set on a career in the theater." Mrs. Leach leaned closer, lowering her voice. "And there's more. My cousin's girl works at Old Hall, and she says Mrs. Protheroe's been slipping out evenings to that artist's studio. Mark you, if the colonel finds out, there'll be the devil to pay." I cleared my throat, announcing my presence, and the ladies started, their chatter halting abruptly. "Good morning, Vicar," Mrs. Leach said, recovering quickly. "Just catching up on village news. Care for your usual tobacco?" I nodded, feeling the weight of their words. Archer's threats, Lettice's rebellion, Anne's clandestine visits, each was a thread in a tapestry of discontent, with Colonel Protheroe at its center. Meanwhile, across the village, Miss Jane Marple sat in her garden, her knitting needles moving rhythmically as she observed the world from her wicker chair. Dane Mead's garden was a haven of order, rose bushes pruned to perfection, a lavender border humming with bees, and a view of the high street that allowed her to note every passerby. This morning, she had seen Lettice Protheroe cycle by, her blonde hair streaming, heading toward the tennis courts with a defiant air. "So like young Clara," Miss Marple mused, recalling a village girl from decades past who had defied her father's wishes and run off to London, only to return heartbroken. The young are reckless, but the heart wants what it wants. Her maid, Florence, brought out a tray of tea, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the previous evening's gossip, relayed by Mrs. Price Ridley over scones. The colonel's dinner at the vicarage had been the talk of the circle, with Anne Protheroe's distraction a focal point. "She barely touched her food," Mrs. Price Ridley had declared, her eyes gleaming with suspicion, "and kept looking out toward that painter's studio. Mark my words, there's something improper there." Miss Hartnell had chimed in, mentioning the colonel's latest feud with Dr. Stone, who was excavating a barrow on Old Hall's grounds. "Protheroe's threatening to shut it down, says Stone's trespassed one too many times." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind sifting through these fragments. She knew Dr. Stone, a wiry man with an academic's stoop and a passion for Roman relics, and his assistant, Miss Gladys Cram, a robust young woman whose enthusiasm for archaeology outstripped her tact. They had set up camp at the Blue Boar, and their dig had sparked rumors of hidden treasure, gold coins, perhaps, or ancient jewelry. People do get fanciful, Miss Marple thought, but she recalled a similar excavation in her youth, where greed had led to betrayal. "Motives," she murmured, her needles pausing. "They're like weeds, plentiful and persistent." Her reverie was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Price Ridley herself, striding up the path with the determination of a general. "Miss Marple, I simply must speak with you," she announced, settling into a chair without waiting for an invitation. "It's about that dreadful Protheroe. He's stirred up the whole village again. Do you know he's accusing Dr. Stone of fraud? Says the barrow's a sham to fleece him for funds." Miss Marple raised an eyebrow, her expression serene, but her mind alert. "Indeed? And what does Dr. Stone say?" Mrs. Price Ridley sniffed. "Oh, he's furious. I saw him at the inn, muttering about legal action. And then there's Archer, released from jail and swearing vengeance. It's all terribly unsettling." Miss Marple nodded, offering a biscuit. "The Colonel does seem to inspire strong feelings. And Mrs. Protheroe, how does she bear it?" Mrs. Price. Ridley's eyes narrowed. "She's a sly one, that Anne. All demure, but I saw her yesterday walking toward Redding's studio with a basket, as if she were delivering preserves." "Preserves, indeed. I'd wager it's more than fruit she's carrying." Miss Marple's lips twitched, but she said only, "One mustn't assume too much. Appearances can deceive." Yet inwardly she filed away the detail, recalling a village scandal where a basket had concealed love letters. As Mrs. Price Ridley prattled on, Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the vicarage, where she knew the Colonel would return that evening for his meeting with the vicar. She thought of Anne Protheroe, trapped in a marriage that stifled her spirit, and of Lawrence Redding, whose charm masked a restless ambition. So like Robert and Emily, she mused, thinking of a long-ago couple whose passion had ended in ruin. Love can be a dangerous thing when it's forbidden. Back at Old Hall, Anne Protheroe stood in her morning room, a delicate space filled with her watercolors and the scent of lilies. The Colonel was out, inspecting the estate with his gamekeeper, and the house was quiet, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Anne's hands trembled as she arranged flowers, her thoughts far from the task. Lawrence had been reckless last night, whispering plans in the studio's dim light, plans that thrilled and terrified her. "We could be free," he had said, his hand brushing hers as he cleaned his brushes. "He's a tyrant, Anne. You deserve better." She had nodded, her heart racing, but fear held her back. The Colonel's temper was formidable, his control absolute, yet the seed of rebellion had taken root. Lawrence, meanwhile, was in his studio, a cluttered space filled with canvases and the sharp smell of turpentine. He stood before Anne's portrait, half-finished, her likeness captured in soft greens and golds. But his mind was not on art. A small box lay hidden beneath a pile of rags, a box containing something far more dangerous than paint. He paced, his jaw set, weighing the risks. The village saw him as a charming outsider, but beneath the surface burned a determination to claim what he believed was his. "Tonight," he muttered, glancing toward the vicarage. At the Blue Boar, Dr. Stone and Miss Cram were deep in discussion over a lunch of cold ham and pickles. The archaeologist's face was flushed with indignation. "Protheroe's impossible," he exclaimed, slamming his fork down. "He's cut our access to the barrow, claims we're trespassing. Trespassing! It's a public right-of-way, and he knows it." Miss Cram, her cheeks rosy from the summer heat, nodded vigorously. "He's just greedy, Doctor. Thinks we'll find gold and he'll claim it. I heard him shouting at the Colonel yesterday. Threatened to expose some old scandal if we don't stop." Stone's eyes narrowed. "Scandal, eh? Well, two can play at that game." Their conversation was overheard by the inn's barmaid, who relayed it to Mrs. Leach at the shop, ensuring its swift spread through the village. By midday, St. Mary Mead was abuzz with motives: Archer's vendetta, Lettuce's resentment, Stone's fury, and the whispered liaison between Anne and Lawrence. Even the curate Hawes was not above suspicion. His nervous demeanor and recent arguments with Protheroe fueled speculation. "He's hiding something," Mrs. Hartnell declared at the Women's Institute, her voice carrying over the clatter of teacups. As the afternoon waned, I prepared for the Colonel's visit, arranging the church accounts on my desk with a sense of dread. Griselda, sensing my mood, suggested a walk, but I declined, needing to face the ordeal head-on. "He'll be here at 6, I told her. "Best get it over with." She kissed my cheek, her eyes dancing. "You're a saint, Len. If he's too beastly, I'll slip something in his tea." I laughed, but the jest lingered uneasily. Miss Marple, meanwhile, took her usual stroll along the high street, her basket swinging lightly. She paused by the churchyard, noting the fresh earth where the sexton had been digging. Her eyes strayed to Redding's studio, its skylight catching the sun. So many currents, she thought, all flowing toward one point. She recalled a village feud from her girlhood, where a single act of defiance had unraveled a family. "The Colonel is not a man to forgive," she murmured, her needles resuming their rhythm as she returned home. At Old Hall, Anne slipped a note into her pocket, her handwriting hurried but precise. She would deliver it to Lawrence before the Colonel's return. At the studio, Lawrence cleaned his pistol, his movements deliberate. At the Blue Boar, Dr. Stone penned a letter to his solicitor, hinting at legal action. And in the vicarage, I sat alone, unaware that the motives swirling through St. Mary Mead were about to converge in my study, with consequences none could foresee. The clock struck 5, and the village held its breath, as if sensing the storm about to break. Chapter 4. The Fatal Appointment. The afternoon of that fateful day in St. Mary Mead unfolded with a languid warmth that seemed to mock the undercurrents of tension rippling through the village. The sun hung high, bathing the vicarage garden in a haze of golden light, where Griselda's attempts at weeding had resulted in more uprooted flowers than intruders. I watched her from my study window, her laughter floating in as she tossed a clump of earth at our cat, Tiberius, who regarded her with feline disdain. It was a scene of domestic bliss, yet my mind was far from peaceful. The Colonel's impending visit at 6 o'clock loomed like a dark cloud, his promise of a private word echoing with ominous authority. I had spent the morning in pastoral duties, a baptism consultation with the young Smiths, whose infant son gurgled obliviously through the discussion, and a visit to the almshouses, where old Mr. Pettigrew regaled me with tales of bygone harvests. These interactions provided a welcome distraction, but as luncheon approached, the weight of anticipation returned. Griselda, sensing my mood, had prepared a light meal of cold chicken and salad, served on the terrace under the wisteria arbor. "Len, you're fretting like a schoolboy before the headmaster," she chided, pouring lemonade with a flourish. "What can Protheroe possibly do? Excommunicate you for misplaced pennies?" I smiled faintly, spearing a tomato. "It's not the accounts that worry me, Griselda. It's his manner, the way he turns everything into a campaign, and last night's dinner. Anne seemed so withdrawn. I wonder if all's well at Old Hall." Griselda's eyes twinkled with her customary irreverence. "Withdrawn? Darling, she's probably plotting his demise. Who wouldn't, married to that pompous old goat? Pass the mustard." Her levity eased my spirits momentarily, but as we finished eating, a knock at the garden gate interrupted us. It was Dennis, my nephew, a lively boy of 16, home from school for the holidays and full of adolescent energy. He bounded in, his cricket bat slung over one shoulder, his face smeared with dust from a morning match on the green. "Uncle Len, Aunt Griselda, you'll never guess. There's been a row at the dig site. Dr. Stone and the Colonel going at it hammer and tongs." Griselda leaned forward, intrigued. "Do tell, Dennis. What happened?" He plopped down, helping himself to a leftover drumstick. "I was cycling past Old Hall, and there they were, Protheroe red as a beet, waving his stick, and Stone shouting about rights and artifacts. Miss Cram was there, too, looking ready to brain someone with her trowel. Protheroe said something about calling the police if they didn't pack up." I exchanged a glance with Griselda. This escalation fit the pattern of the Colonel's feuds, but it added another layer to the day's unease. "Did it come to blows?" I asked. Dennis shook his head, grinning. "Nah, but Stone stormed off muttering threats, said Protheroe would regret it." Griselda laughed. "The village is a powder keg today. First Archer's grudges, now this. Len, perhaps you should cancel your meeting. Plead a headache." I shook my head firmly. No, that would only inflame him further. Best to face it head-on. After luncheon, Dennis departed for more cricket, and Griselda announced she would call on Miss Marple. "The old dear's garden is a marvel. Perhaps she'll share her secret for those prize dahlias." I returned to my study, attempting to focus on next Sunday's sermon, a meditation on turning the other cheek, ironic given the circumstances. The room was cool and dim, the heavy curtains drawn against the sun, and the desk cluttered with parish ledgers. As the clock ticked toward 4, I heard the front door open. Mary, our maid, returning from errands in the village, her arms laden with parcels. "Mary," I called, "any news from the high street?" She poked her head in, her cap askew, her expression a mix of exasperation and excitement. "News? It's all anyone's talking about, sir. That Archer fellow's been seen skulking near the woods, says he's got a score to settle with the Colonel, and Miss Lettice Protheroe was at the tea shop, crying her eyes out. Said her father's forbidden her to see that young man from London." I nodded, unsurprised. Lettice's flirtations were a constant source of friction at Old Hall. "And Mrs. Protheroe?" Mary hesitated, wiping her hands on her apron. "Quiet as a mouse, sir. But I heard from the butcher's boy she's been to Mr. Redding's studio. Again this morning. Portrait sitting, they call it." Her tone implied skepticism, and I dismissed her gently, my thoughts churning. The afternoon dragged on. At 4:30, an unexpected visitor arrived. The curate, Mr. Hawes, his face ashen and his hands trembling. He entered the study hesitantly, clutching his hat like a shield. "Vicar, I must speak with you. It's urgent." I motioned him to a chair, concerned by his agitation. "What is it, Hawes?" "You look unwell." He sank down, his voice a whisper. "It's the Colonel. He cornered me after Matins, accused me of mishandling the collection plate. Said he'd prove it and have me dismissed." Tears welled in his eyes. "It's not true, Vicar, I swear it, but he's relentless. And there's more. I've been receiving anonymous letters, vile things, hinting at secrets from my past." This revelation startled me. Hawes had always struck me as fragile, burdened by some inner turmoil, but anonymous letters suggested a deeper malice in the village. "Have you any idea who might send them?" He shook his head miserably. "None, but the Colonel, he mentioned them as if he knew. Vicar, what shall I do?" I counseled patience and prayer, promising to speak with Protheroe that evening. Hawes left somewhat comforted, but his visit left me unsettled. Who in St. Mary Mead harbored such venom? As 5 o'clock approached, Griselda returned from Miss Marple's, her cheeks flushed from the walk. "Len, you won't believe the insights that woman has. We talked about everything, the dig, the Protheroes, even young Redding. Miss Marple says it's all so reminiscent of a scandal in her youth, a domineering husband, a restless wife, a charming interloper." She paused, eyeing me curiously. "She asked after you, said to be careful with the colonel, almost as if she senses trouble." I chuckled, though uneasily. Miss Marple's intuitions were legendary, her village parallels often uncannily accurate. Griselda busied herself in the drawing room, arranging flowers, while I paced the study. The clock's hands crept inexorably toward 6. At 5:50, a distant rumble announced a visitor, not the colonel's Bentley, but a bicycle bell. It was Dr. Haydock, our village physician, dismounting with his black bag in hand. "Clement, glad I caught you. Mind if I pop in for a word?" I welcomed him, grateful for the diversion. Haydock, a sturdy man with a no-nonsense manner, settled into the armchair. "It's about Protheroe. Saw him this morning. Routine checkup. Man's blood pressure is through the roof. Told him to ease up on the rages, but he laughed it off. Said he's got too many fools to deal with." We discussed parish health matters briefly, but Haydock's eyes sharpened. "Heard about the dust-up with Stone? Protheroe's making enemies left and right, and that wife of his looks peaky. Nervous strain, I'd say." He rose to leave just as the clock struck 6, clapping me on the shoulder. "Chin up, old chap. Don't let him bully you." As he departed, the sound of another car approached, the Bentley's familiar growl. But curiously, no knock followed. I glanced out the window. The car was parked, but empty. Perhaps the colonel had entered through the garden gate, as was his habit when in a hurry. "Protheroe?" I called, stepping into the hall. Silence. Griselda emerged from the drawing room. "Is he here?" I didn't hear the door. Puzzled, I checked the front. Still no sign. Odd. Perhaps he's in the study already. But the room was empty, the desk undisturbed. Minutes ticked by. At 6:10, a faint sound reached us, a muffled pop, like a distant firework or a car backfiring. Griselda tilted her head. "What was that?" I shrugged. "Probably boys with catapults in the lane." We waited another 5 minutes, but impatience grew. "I'll check the garden," I said, but before I could move, Mary burst in from the kitchen, her face white as chalk. "Sir, ma'am, there's a body in the study. The colonel, shot." Her words struck like a thunderbolt. We rushed to the study. There he lay, slumped over my desk, a pool of blood staining the blotter, a pistol glinting on the carpet. The window stood ajar, curtains stirring in the breeze. Griselda gasped, clutching my arm. "Len!" Oh, God. I knelt, feeling for a pulse. None. The wound was to the temple, powder burns evident. "Mary, fetch Dr. Haydock at once, and telephone the police." Chaos ensued. Haydock arrived swiftly, confirming death. "Shot at close range, recent within the last quarter hour." Inspector Slack from Much Benham followed, a sharp-featured man with a brusque efficiency. He sealed the room, questioning us tersely. "You heard nothing? No argument?" I recounted the muffled sound at 6:15. "And the clock here shows 6:20, Slack noted, pointing to the mantelpiece timepiece, which indeed read that. But Griselda frowned. "That's odd. It was correct at 5. Slack's eyes narrowed. "Tampered with, perhaps. And this note?" On the desk, scrawled in the colonel's hand. Can't wait any longer. Life's unbearable." But it was unfinished, trailing off. The inspector pocketed it. Suicide? Possible, but the pistol's position is queer. As he worked, villagers gathered outside, whispers spreading like wildfire. Miss Marple, alerted by Griselda's earlier visit, arrived discreetly, her shawl drawn tight. She slipped in amid the confusion, her keen eyes scanning the scene. "Dear Vicar, what a tragedy." But her gaze lingered on the window, the clock, the pistol. "So like the Hargreaves case," she murmured to herself, recalling a staged suicide from years past. The timing, always the key. Anne Protheroe was summoned, arriving pale but composed, Lawrence Redding at her side, oddly solicitous. "I was walking nearby," he explained. "Heard the news." Anne collapsed into a chair, weeping softly. Lucius, who could do this? Slack interrogated them, alibis vague, motives hinted at. Lawrence admitted a recent argument with the colonel over artistic matters. Anne denied discord, but her eyes betrayed fear. As night fell, the body was removed, the vicarage a hive of activity. Slack departed, promising swift resolution. Griselda, shaken, prepared tea. "Len, it's monstrous. In our home." I nodded, numb. Miss Marple lingered, her voice soft. "Motives abound, Vicar. But look to the deceptions, the false trails." Her words echoed as I retired, the study's shadow haunting my dreams. The investigation's first hours revealed fragments. Archer spotted near the woods at 6, no alibi. Stone and Cram at the dig, quarrel fresh. Hawes seen praying in the church, distraught. Lettuce at a tea party, but slipped out early. And the mysterious Mrs. Lestrange, the newcomer to the village, observed walking the lane, her purpose unknown. In her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, knitting forgotten. The appointment was fatal indeed, she thought. But for whom? The web is spun, now to trace the spider. Chapter 5. Suspects emerge. The hours following the Tiwa, discovery of Colonel Protheroe's body in my study blurred into a whirlwind of activity that transformed the vicarage from a haven of quiet reflection into a makeshift headquarters for the forces of law and order. Inspector Slack, with his clipped mustache and penetrating gaze, took command with the efficiency of a man who viewed murder as a personal affront to his professional pride. Constables swarmed the premises, measuring distances, dusting for fingerprints, and cordoning off the garden path with tape that fluttered like ominous ribbons in the evening breeze. Griselda, pale but resolute, brewed endless pots of tea in the kitchen, while Mary hovered nearby, her usual stolid demeanor cracked by wide-eyed shock. I sat in the drawing room, still reeling from the sight of the colonel's crumpled form, his once booming presence reduced to a lifeless shell. The pistol on the floor, the unfinished note, the tampered clock, all swirled in my mind like fragments of a nightmare. "Vicar," Slack barked, entering with a notebook in hand. "Let's have your account again. Every detail, no omissions." I repeated the sequence. The colonel's car arriving early, the muffled shot at 6:15, Mary's horrific find. Slack's eyes bored into mine. "And you were where, exactly?" "In the hall with Griselda," I replied steadily. "We heard nothing untoward until the pop, like a cork, perhaps." He grunted, jotting notes. "Alibi checks out, for now. But motive? You admitted disliking the man." I conceded the point. Protheroe's churchwarden zeal had often clashed with my milder approach. "But murder?" "Inspector, I'm a man of the cloth." Slack's lip curled. "Cloth doesn't preclude crime, Clement. Seen vicars swing before?" Griselda, entering with a tray, overheard and set it down with a clatter. "Really, Inspector?" My husband wouldn't harm a fly. Question the real suspects. Half the village had reason. Slack turned to her sharply. And you, madam? Where were you before 6? Griselda met his gaze coolly. Arranging flowers in here. Heard the car, assumed he'd gone straight to the study. The inspector probed further, his questions like darts. Had we noticed intruders? Any unusual visitors? Griselda mentioned hearing a sneeze from the study around 5:50. Odd, since the room was empty. A sneeze? Slack echoed, intrigued. Human or animal? Human, definitely, she affirmed, like someone with hay fever. He noted it, then dismissed us temporarily, summoning Mary next. The maid, twisting her apron, recounted finding the body while bringing in coal. Door was ajar, sir. Saw him there. Blood everywhere. I screamed fit to wake the dead. Slack pressed. Touch anything? No, sir. Ran straight to the master. As evening deepened, the vicarage filled with a procession of villagers, drawn by the siren call of tragedy. Dr. Haydock returned, having performed a preliminary examination. Death instantaneous, he reported to Slack in the hall, his voice low but carrying. Bullet entered the right temple, exited left. Time of death, between 6:10 and 6:25. Rigor just setting in. Slack nodded. Matches the shot heard, but the clock showed 6:20. Backdated, you think? Haydock shrugged. Possible. Wound suggests close range, but no scorching on the skin. Odd for suicide. Word spread swiftly, and soon Anne Protheroe arrived, escorted by a constable. She entered the drawing room like a ghost, her face ashen beneath her veil, supported by Lawrence Redding, who had appeared unbidden. I was passing when I heard, he explained smoothly, his artist's hands steady on her arm. Anne sank into a chair, her voice a whisper. Lucius, dead? It can't be. Slack, ever the inquisitor, wasted no time. Mrs. Protheroe, where were you at 6? She hesitated, glancing at Lawrence. At home, preparing for dinner. Lettuce can confirm. But her eyes betrayed flicker of uncertainty. The inspector turned to Redding. And you, sir? An artist, eh? Studio nearby. Convenient. Lawrence met his stare levelly. Walking the fields for inspiration. Heard the commotion, came running. Slack's eyebrow arched. Witnesses? None, but I Saw Archer lurking near the woods. Anne gasped softly, but Slack pounced. Motive, Mrs. Protheroe? Your husband was difficult. Tears welled. We had our differences, but murder? No exclamation mark. Yet the air thickened with unspoken truths, the portrait sessions, the whispers of affection. Lettuce Protheroe followed, a whirlwind of youth and defiance. She burst in, her tennis frock rumpled, eyes red-rimmed. Father? Shot? Who would? Slack cut in. You, perhaps. He cut your allowance, forbade your bow. Lettuce flushed. I hated his rules, but kill him? Absurd. Her alibi, a tea party at the Mrs. Weatherby's, though she admitted leaving early for a headache. Around 5:40, she said. Slack noted the timing, close enough to reach the vicarage unseen. The parade continued. Bill Archer, dragged in by a constable, reeked of ale from the Blue Boar, his rough features twisted in defiance. I hated the blighter, locked me up for nowt, but I didn't shoot him. His whereabouts, the pub, until 6:30. Vouched by the landlord, though a gap existed if he'd slipped out. Prove it, he snarled, but Slack's gaze promised scrutiny. Dr. Stone and Miss Cram arrived together, the archaeologist's face thunderous. This is outrageous, summoned like criminals. Slack was unmoved. You quarreled with Protheroe today, threatened him. Stone blustered. Over the dig. He accused us of fraud, wanted us off his land. Miss Cram, sturdy and forthright, added, "We were packing tools at 6, alibi solid." But their sight overlooked the vicarage path. A detour was possible. Mr. Hawes, the curate, was next, his nervousness bordering on hysteria. He entered wringing his hands, collapsing into a chair. "Inspector, it's dreadful. I prayed for patience with him, but—" Slack leaned forward. "You argued over sermons, and those anonymous letters, blackmail." Hawes paled. "How did you—" "Yes, vile accusations, but I didn't kill him. His alibi. Alone in the church vestry, preparing hymns. No witnesses. Even Mrs. Lestrange, the enigmatic newcomer renting a cottage on the outskirts, was questioned. She arrived veiled and composed, her accent hinting at continental origins. "I know nothing of this," she stated coolly. "I walked the lanes this afternoon, for health." Slack pressed. "Near the vicarage?" "Perhaps," she conceded, but offered no more, her poise unbreakable. Through it all I observed from the sidelines, my clerical role affording me a vantage point. Griselda whispered theories. Anne and Lawrence, too obvious, or Archer, too crude. But it was Miss Marple's arrival the next morning that brought clarity amid the fog. She appeared at the vicarage door with a basket of eggs, her fluffy white hair escaping her bonnet, her eyes sharp as ever. "My dear vicar, Griselda, such a shock. May I offer condolences, and perhaps a listening ear?" We welcomed her into the drawing room, where Slack was reviewing notes. He eyed her dubiously. "Village spinster, eh?" But Griselda insisted. "Inspector, Miss Marple sees things others miss." Reluctantly, he allowed her to view the study, now cleared, but marked with chalk outlines. Miss Marple moved delicately, her gaze lingering on the desk, the window, the clock reset to accuracy. "The timepiece," she murmured. "Set back by how much?" Slack grunted. 10 minutes, give or take. Why?" She smiled faintly. "It reminds me of the Wilkins affair, alibis built on falsehoods." Over tea, she shared observations. "The sneeze Griselda heard suggests someone hiding, waiting, and the note, 'Can't wait any longer,' ambiguous, could be despair or impatience." Slack scoffed. "Suicide theories thin, no powder on hands?" Miss Marple nodded. "Indeed. Look to pairings. Love, greed, fear. Anne Protheroe's eyes, haunted, like poor Matilda's when her husband discovered her secret." The day progressed with further revelations. A search of Redding's studio yielded sketches of Anne, intimate, revealing. "Artistic license," he claimed, but Slack seized a box of cartridges matching the pistol's caliber. "Explain this." Lawrence shrugged. "For protection, lonely spot." But tension mounted. Lettuce confessed more. "Father found letters from my London friend, threatened to disinherit me." Motive strengthened. Stone admitted financial desperation, the dig funded by dubious grants. Protheroe knew, threatened exposure. Hawes broke down, revealing the letters accused him of a youthful theft. But innocent, I fled my old parish. Mrs. Lestrange remained a cipher, her walks coinciding with the murder hour. "She's hiding something," Griselda said. Archer's pub alibi cracked. A witness saw him leave at 6. Mid-afternoon, drama peaked. Lawrence Redding marched into the vicarage, face set. "Inspector, I confess, I shot Protheroe." Gasps echoed. "We argued. He insulted Anne. I lost control." Slack arrested him on the spot, but Miss Marple, knitting in the corner, shook her head. "Too pat, Inspector, like the feigned guilt in the Benson case, to shield another." As Lawrence was led away, Anne wept hysterically. "No, it's not true." But her protest rang hollow. The village buzzed, case closed, yet doubts lingered. The clock, the sneeze, the unfinished note. Evening brought reflection. Griselda and I walked the garden, the air heavy with jasmine. "Miss Marple's right," she said. "It's not over." I agreed, sensing layers yet unpeeled. Miss Marple visited again, her voice soft. "Observe the deceptions, Vicar. The pistol planted, the shot staged, human nature repeats, protection breeds folly. Suspects emerged, alibis frayed, but truth hid in shadows, waiting for light." Chapter 6. False Trails. The arrest of Lawrence Redding sent ripples through St. Mary Mead that persisted well into the following days, much like the aftershocks of an earthquake in a landscape already prone to tremors. The village, accustomed to the gentle ebb and flow of everyday scandals, lost cats, disputed flower show prizes, and the occasional marital spat, now found itself at the epicenter of a genuine murder inquiry. Whispers in the high street shops grew into fervent discussions at the Blue Boar, where patrons clustered around pints, debating the artist's guilt with the authority of armchair detectives. "Always knew he was trouble," proclaimed the landlord, polishing glasses with vigor. "Those brooding types, paintbrushes one day, pistols the next." At the vicarage, the atmosphere remained charged, the study now a forbidden zone marked by police tape and the faint, lingering scent of gunpowder that no amount of airing could dispel. Griselda, ever resilient, had taken to hosting impromptu teas for the stream of curious callers, turning our home into a salon of speculation. "Len," she said one morning over breakfast, her eyes alight with intrigue, "do you really think Lawrence did it? His confession seemed so theatrical, like something from one of those West End melodramas." I pondered her words, stirring my tea absent-mindedly. The young man's dramatic admission had indeed struck a chord of artificiality, but Inspector Slack appeared satisfied, wrapping up loose ends with bureaucratic zeal. Slack himself called that afternoon, his boots thudding heavily on the hall floor as he entered. "Clement," he announced without preamble, settling into the drawing-room armchair like a man claiming territory. "Redding's sticking to his story. Says he slipped in through the garden, argued with Protheroe about Anne, and fired in a fit of passion. Pistol was his, kept it for vermin, he claims." Griselda, pouring coffee, interjected sharply, "But the clock, Inspector? And that sneeze I heard doesn't add up." Slack's mustache twitched in irritation. "Details, madam. The clock could be a red herring. Perhaps Protheroe fiddled with it himself. As for the sneeze, hay fever's rampant this season. Case closed near enough." Yet even as he spoke, doubts niggled at me. The unfinished note, "Can't wait any longer," hinted at deeper despair, possibly unrelated to Lawrence's tale. And Anne Protheroe's reaction, her hysterical denial, had rung with a fervor that suggested more than grief. I voiced these thoughts mildly, but Slack waved them aside. "Motive, means, opportunity, all there. Ballistics match. We'll have him before the assizes in no time." He departed with a nod, leaving us in contemplative silence. It was Miss Marple who first articulated the notion of false trails during her visit the next day. She arrived unannounced, her basket brimming with fresh scones from her oven, a gesture of neighborly comfort that masked her sharper purpose. Seated by the window, her knitting needles clicking in rhythmic counterpoint to her words, she surveyed the garden with those deceptively mild eyes. "My dear Vicar," she began, accepting a cup of tea, Human affairs are so often like a tangled skein of wool. Pull one thread, and others unravel unexpectedly. Mr. Redding's confession. Brave, perhaps, but is it true? Griselda leaned forward eagerly. Exactly what I've been saying. It's too neat. Miss Marple nodded, her voice soft but incisive. In my experience, confessions born of chivalry seldom hold water. Recall the case of young Frederick in the village years ago. Confessed to theft to protect his sister. The real culprit emerged later, quite by accident. She paused, sipping delicately. Observe the discrepancies, the silenced shot, if it was muffled, the planted weapon, the adjusted time. These suggest planning, not impulse. Her words resonated, prompting me to recount Slack's dismissal. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Inspectors are practical men, but they overlook the subtleties of character. Mrs. Protheroe, her composure cracks only at key moments, and that mysterious Mrs. Lestrange, her walks coincide too conveniently with the tragedy. Griselda's eyes widened. You think she's involved? Miss Marple demurred. One speculates, my dear, but trails diverge. Some lead to truth, others to deception. The village, meanwhile, pursued its own investigations with gusto. Mrs. Price Ridley, ever the vanguard of gossip, hosted a gathering at her cottage where the ladies' circle dissected the arrest over cucumber sandwiches. Redding's guilty as sin, she declared, her bosom heaving with conviction. Those passionate eyes, mark of a killer, Miss Hartnell countered. But what of Archer? Seen arguing with the colonel hours before. Miss Weatherby, the romantic, sighed. It's love, surely, Lawrence sacrificing for Anne. Their chatter, relayed to me by Griselda, painted a mosaic of conjecture, each piece a potential misdirection. Dr. Haydock dropped by that evening, his bicycle propped against the vicarage wall as he shared a pipe with me in the garden. The sun dipped low, casting elongated shadows across the lawn, and the air hummed with the evening chorus of birds. Slack's rushing it, Haydock grumbled, puffing thoughtfully. Autopsy shows no struggle, no defensive wounds. Protheroe was caught unawares, perhaps by someone he trusted. I nodded, recalling the colonel's authoritarian nature. Trust was a commodity he doled out sparingly. And the powder burns? Haydock frowned. Minimal, suggests a silencer or distance, but the pistol had none attached. This revelation spurred further doubt. If Lawrence's confession hinged on a spontaneous act, why the inconsistencies? Haydock continued. I've been chatting with Stone. His alibi's shaky. Says he was at the dig, but Miss Cram admits he stepped away for fresh air around 6. The archaeologist's grudge over the barrow loomed larger, a trail winding through envy and ambition. The next morning brought a fresh twist, a second confession, this one from the curate, Mr. Hawes. He appeared at the vicarage door, pale and trembling, his clerical collar askew, insisting on seeing me privately. In the drawing room, he collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. Vicar, I can't bear it. I must confess. It was I who killed Colonel Protheroe. Griselda, overhearing, gasped from the doorway. Hawes, what madness is this? He poured out a torrent of words, the anonymous letters accusing him of embezzlement, Protheroe's threats to expose him, a desperate confrontation in the study. He laughed at my pleas, called me a sniveling coward. I grabbed the pistol from his pocket and fired. I stared, incredulous. The tale echoed Lawrence's in its passion, but Hawes's frailty made it implausible. The pistol was Redding's, I pointed out gently. Hawes faltered. I must have mistaken. Griselda fetched Slack, who arrived post-haste, his skepticism evident. Another one? This village is a confessional booth. Hawes was taken for questioning, but his story crumbled under scrutiny. No knowledge of the clock or note. Miss Marple, informed later, chuckled softly over tea. False trails indeed. Mr. Hawes seeks atonement for imagined sins. His nerves are shattered, like poor Reverend Sims, who confessed to arson when it was merely a faulty lamp. Her insight illuminated the pattern, confessions as shields, diverting from the true path. Anne Protheroe's demeanor fueled further speculation. She visited the vicarage that afternoon, veiled and subdued, ostensibly to collect a forgotten shawl from the dinner party. "Vicar," she murmured, her hands clasped tightly. "Lawrence is innocent. I know it." Her eyes, shadowed with exhaustion, pleaded for belief. "Then who?" Griselda asked bluntly. Anne hesitated, glancing toward the study door. I heard a second shot that evening, from the woods. Perhaps an echo, but..." She trailed off, departing hastily. This new detail, a second shot, echoed reports from neighbors. Mrs. Archer, Bill's mother, claimed hearing 2 pops while hanging laundry. "One muffled, t'other clear," she told the constable. Slack dismissed it as imagination, but Miss Marple seized upon it. "Diversions, my dear, like fireworks to mask a theft. One shot to kill, another to mislead the time." Lettice Protheroe added her own layer of confusion. Encountered at the post office, she confided tearfully to Griselda. "Father had a secret, letters from Mrs. Lestrange. I found one in his desk. We must meet, old matters unresolved." This hinted at hidden history, perhaps blackmail. Mrs. Lestrange, when approached by Slack, remained enigmatic. "Personal affairs," she stated coolly, "irrelevant to murder." Yet her presence in St. Mary Mead, coinciding with Protheroe's death, suggested otherwise. Dr. Stone's assistant, Miss Cram, provided another tangent. Overheard at the Blue Boar, she boasted of treasures unearthed despite the colonel's ban. A Roman brooch worth a fortune. Envy as motive resurfaced, but Stone's alibi, though porous, held with Cram's corroboration. As days blurred, I walked the lanes, seeking clarity amid the hedgerows bursting with blackberries. The village seemed a labyrinth of deceptions. Lawrence's chivalrous lie, Hawes's neurotic outburst, Anne's veiled hints. Even Archer, released after questioning, muttered of frames while tilling his plot. Miss Marple's evening visit crystallized my thoughts. Seated in her garden under the stars, her shawl draped against the chill, she unraveled the skein. False trails branch from truth, Vicar. The sneeze, perhaps a signal. The note, interrupted by death. And partnerships, rarely does one act alone in such matters. Her parallels to past scandals. A lover's pact, a family's secret, wove a tapestry of possibility. Griselda, joining us, speculated wildly. What if it's Lestrange, Protheroe's past catching up? Miss Marple smiled. Possible, but observe the lovers, Anne and Lawrence. Their bond is the key. Protection breeds elaborate ruses. The chapter of false trails closed with Slack's announcement. Lawrence charged, Hawes dismissed as unstable. Yet unease lingered, the true path obscured by shadows. In St. Mary Mead, deception flourished like weeds, awaiting the keen gardener's hand. Chapter 7. Hidden Alliances. The days following Lawrence Redding's arrest and Mr. Hawes's ill-fated confession settled over St. Mary Mead like a persistent fog, dampening spirits and fueling a restless undercurrent of doubt. The village, ever resilient in its routines, carried on with the superficial normalcy of market days and church bells, but beneath the surface, alliances, some forged in secrecy, others crumbling under scrutiny, began to reveal themselves in subtle, insidious ways. I found myself increasingly drawn into the web, my role as vicar shifting from spiritual guide to reluctant confidant in matters far removed from sermons and sacraments. The vicarage, once a sanctuary, now echoed with the footsteps of inspectors and the murmurs of villagers seeking reassurance or, more often, fresh tidbits to dissect over tea. Inspector Slack, buoyed by Lawrence's incarceration, declared the case all but resolved, attributing the curate's outburst to hysterical tendencies and dismissing it as a bid for attention. "We've our man," he told me during a brief visit, his notebook snapping shut with finality. "Motive clear as day, jealousy over the wife, the rest is noise." Yet his confidence rang hollow, especially as new revelations trickled in, each one peeling back another layer of the colonel's entangled life. Griselda, with her unerring instinct for drama, sensed it too. "Len, it's like peeling an onion, tears at every turn, and no end in sight." The first crack appeared during a routine search of Old Hall, where constables uncovered documents hinting at Dr. Stone's dubious practices. Protheroe, it seemed, had been compiling a dossier on the archaeologist, forged permits for the barrow dig, inflated expense claims submitted to historical societies, and whispers of smuggled artifacts sold on the black market. Stone, confronted at the Blue Boar, blustered indignantly. "Slander. The colonel was paranoid, saw thieves everywhere." But Miss Cram, his loyal assistant, let slip a telling detail while chatting with Mary at the village shop. "The doctor was desperate for funds. That barrow was our last hope. Protheroe threatened to report us to the authorities, ruin everything." Slack, informed, hauled Stone in for questioning, where the man admitted a heated exchange the day before the murder. "I told him to back off," Stone growled. "But violence? I'm a scholar, not a brute." This exposure of Stone's vulnerabilities stirred the pot further, prompting others to unburden themselves. Lettuce Protheroe, pale and defiant, sought me out at the vicarage one rainy afternoon, her umbrella dripping on the hall tiles as she confessed a petty crime born of desperation. "Father was impossible," she said, twisting a handkerchief in her lap. "He controlled every penny, said I was frivolous, unfit for independence. So I took from his safe, just enough for train fare to London to audition for the stage." Her eyes, so like her mother's in their intensity, filled with tears. "He discovered it that morning, raged about disinheritance. If word gets out now..." I offered counsel, urging honesty with the police, but her revelation painted her as yet another, with cause to silence the colonel before he could act on his threats. Even I, to my discomfort, found myself ensnared in the net of suspicion. During a follow-up interview, Slack pressed me on the dinner party exchange. "You argued with Protheroe the night before, raised voices, witnesses say." I admitted it wearily. His barbs about church management had escalated into a sharp rebuke from me, rare for my temperament. I told him his interference was unwelcome, that the parish needed compassion, not commands. Griselda, overhearing from the doorway, added with a wry smile, "Len was magnificent, stood his ground like a lion. But murder? Preposterous." Slack's gaze lingered, but he moved on, leaving me to ponder how even fleeting anger could cast long shadows. Amid these disclosures, Miss Jane Marple emerged as the quiet architect of understanding, her cottage a hub of subtle inquiry where villagers unwittingly revealed more than they intended. I visited her one evening, drawn by a note slipped under the vicarage door. Tea at 4, if convenient. Matters of alliance to discuss. Dame Mead welcomed me with the aroma of fresh baked biscuits and the steady click of her needles, crafting what appeared to be a baby's blanket in soft pastels. For my great niece, she explained, pouring from a china pot. Knitting clears the mind, Vicar, allows one to see patterns where others see chaos. She wasted no time, her blue eyes piercing over her spectacles. Evil often comes in pairs, Mr. Clement. Seldom does wickedness thrive alone. It seeks companionship, like vines entwining a trellis. She drew analogies from St. Mary Mead's shadowed history, the baker's wife and the postman, whose illicit collaboration had masked embezzlement from the shop till, or the gardener and the housemaid at the old manor, conspiring to pilfer silverware under the guise of separate thefts. Alliances hide guilt, she mused, dividing suspicion as they share the burden. I listened, fascinated, as she wove these tales into the present tapestry. Observe Mrs. Protheroe and Mr. Redding, their composure amid turmoil. Anne's tears seemed timed for effect, Lawrence's remorse a performance. What if their bond extends beyond affection to something calculated? Her suspicion of conspiracy sent a chill through me, echoing my own unspoken doubts. But proof? I asked. Miss Marple smiled enigmatically. Proof emerges from observation. That earring found in your study, a pearl drop, matching Anne's set from the dinner party. The inspector dismissed it as lost earlier, but consider, she claimed no visit that day. Indeed, the bauble had been discovered under the desk during the cleanup, its clasp bent as if tugged in haste. A link, Miss Marple continued, suggesting presence at the scene, and Lawrence's pistol, conveniently his, yet perhaps placed by another's hand. Emboldened by her insights, Miss Marple devised a gentle test of her theory. The next day, during a chance encounter at the Women's Institute Bazaar, where stalls groaned under jams and knitted goods, she approached Anne Protheroe amid the crowd. I watched from afar, ostensibly browsing embroidered linens. Miss Marple, her voice carrying just enough for me to overhear, mentioned casually, "Such a pity about the witness, my dear." Saw someone entering the vicarage garden that evening, quite clearly from the lane. Anne's face drained of color, her hand fluttering to her throat. Witness? Who? What did they see? Miss Marple feigned innocence. Oh, nothing definitive, but details emerge. Human nature, you know. Secrets seldom stay buried. Anne excused herself abruptly, her poise shattered, fleeing toward Old Hall with a hurried step. That flinch, Miss Marple confided later over sherry at the vicarage, speaks volumes. Like Mrs. Ellis when confronted about her alibi, guilt betrays itself in the smallest gestures. Griselda, enthralled, pressed for more. You think Anne pulled the trigger, with Lawrence covering? Miss Marple nodded slowly. Possibly. Alliances form in desperation, a wife trapped, a lover bold, but we must tread carefully. Assumptions are pitfalls. The web tightened further with the curate's dramatic collapse. Mr. Hawes, already frayed by his false confession, succumbed to his nerves during evensong. As the congregation filed out, he clutched the pulpit, his face ashen, before crumpling to the chancel floor. Dr. Haydock, summoned hastily, diagnosed exhaustion compounded by guilt. In the vestry, as Haydock administered a restorative, Hawes babbled incoherently at first, then confessed, not to murder, but to authoring the anonymous letters that had plagued him and others. "I wrote them to myself," he whispered, tears streaming, "to deflect suspicion, make it seem like persecution, and a few to Protheroe, warning him of sins. I thought it would humble him, but it only enraged. His motive, resentment over the colonel's constant belittling, mixed with a misguided attempt at moral correction. Slack, notified, viewed it as peripheral mischief. No bearing on the killing," he grunted, but Miss Marple saw deeper. Alliances of one with oneself, self-deception, but it muddies waters, diverting from the true pair. Hawes was sent for rest, his revelations adding another strand to the intrigue. As alliances surfaced, so did whispers of Mrs. Lestrange's role. Lettice, in a moment of candor during a vicarage visit, produced a crumpled letter from her father's effects. "Must resolve our past. Meet discreetly. E.L." Addressed to Protheroe, it hinted at a hidden connection. Confronted, Mrs. Lestrange admitted partial truth. "I was his first wife," she revealed to Slack in a private interview, her veil lifted to show a face lined with quiet resolve. "Divorced years ago, before Anne. I came seeking closure, financial settlement he owed. But murder? I abhorred him, not enough to kill." Her alibi, a solitary walk corroborated by a passing farmer. Yet her presence suggested unseen ties, perhaps an alliance with another aggrieved party. Dr. Stone's alliance with Miss Cram came under scrutiny when a villager reported overhearing their hushed argument at the dig site. "If he exposes us, we're ruined," Cram had said. "We must act." Stone denied malice, claiming it referred to legal countermeasures, but the seed of doubt sprouted. Through it all, Miss Marple's mind whirred like her needles, drawing parallels to the miller's son and the blacksmith, whose joint scheme had toppled a local tyrant decades past. "Hidden alliances thrive in shadows," she told me during a twilight stroll, "but light reveals them. Patience, vicar." The chapter of Revelations culminated in a tense gathering at Old Hall, where Anne hosted a memorial tea. Villagers mingled awkwardly, eyes darting. Lawrence, released on bail pending trial, Slack's concession to mounting inconsistencies, attended, his hand brushing Anne's in a gesture too intimate for grief. Miss Marple, present with her basket, noted it. "See how they orbit each other, support or conspiracy." As guests departed, Anne pulled me aside. "Vicar, believe me, Lawrence is protecting someone." Her words hung cryptic, but her alliance with him shone clear. That night in the vicarage, Griselda speculated. Hidden pairs everywhere, Stone and Cram, Hawes with his demons, even Lestrange and her past. But Anne and Lawrence, that's the core. Miss Marple's final visit that week sealed the tension. "The web tightens, Mr. Clement. Soon the spiders will scurry." Her words prophesied the unraveling to come, alliances fracturing under truth's weight. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. The process of unraveling the mystery of Colonel Protheroe's death reached its climax on a day when the winds of change swept through St. Mary Mead, stripping the trees of their summer foliage and laying bare the truths that had been concealed for too long. It started with Inspector Slack's decision to gather all the key figures at the vicarage for what he termed a conclusive confrontation. His note arrived with the Morning Post, its tone resolute. 6 p.m., sharp. Presence required. The net closes. Griselda, always quick to embrace the dramatic, began planning the event like a social occasion. "We'll have sandwiches and tea. Can't have revelations on empty stomachs," she declared, directing Mary to polish the silver and arrange the room. I spent the day in a state of quiet contemplation, walking the lanes where the hedgerows were heavy with blackberries, my mind sifting through the events that had led us here. The earring, the clock, the confessions, all pointed to a clever scheme, but it was Miss Marple's keen eye that had connected them. She called in the afternoon, her cottage garden yielding a bouquet of late blooms for the table. "Flowers brighten even the darkest hours," she said, arranging them with care. "And today, Vicar, darkness will give way to light." The guests began arriving as the clock struck 5:50, their faces a gallery of emotions. Anne Protheroe came in a motor car, her veil lifted to reveal eyes red from crying, her step faltering as she entered the hall. "Vicar, this is dreadful," she murmured, accepting Griselda's embrace. Lettuce trailed behind, her youthful face etched with confusion, her dress a simple gray that spoke of mourning. Lawrence Redding arrived on foot, his coat collar turned up against the chill, his gaze meeting mine with a mixture of resignation and fire. "Let's get this over," he said, shaking my hand firmly. Dr. Stone and Miss Cram cycled up together, Stone dismounting with a grunt, his tweed jacket dusted with earth from the barrow. "Hope this isn't a waste," he said, while Cram adjusted her spectacles, her notebook at the ready. Mr. Hawes came by bicycle, his face serene, but his hands trembling slightly as he greeted me. "God's will be done," he whispered. Bill Archer tramped in from the fields, his boots leaving mud on the mat, his expression a blend of curiosity and scorn. "Ain't got time for this nonsense," he grumbled. Mrs. Lestrange arrived in a taxi, her figure swathed in black, her voice low as she said, "I came to see justice." The drawing room was soon crowded, the air thick with the scent of tea and tension. Griselda circulated, offering plates of cucumber sandwiches and seed cake, her chatter easing the awkwardness. "Such a lovely evening for it," she said to no one in particular, though the sky outside was overcast. Slack commenced promptly, standing tall. "The facts are these. Protheroe died from a gunshot, timed at 6:22, but the shot heard earlier. The clock backdated, the pistol planted, confessions misled. Tonight we expose the plot." Miss Marple, from her seat, interjected softly. "Allow me, Inspector. The solution is in the partnership, a duet of deception." She elaborated, drawing on her vast reservoir of village lore, comparing it to cases of old. A pair of sisters who forged wills, a husband and mistress who staged accidents. "Anne and Lawrence, your alliance was born of love, but twisted by fear. The plan. Anne kills silently, Lawrence provides the noise, the confession a shield." Questions flew. Lettuce cried, "How could you?" Stone demanded proof. Miss Marple detailed the silencer, the blank, the earring as evidence of presence. The dam broke. Anne and Lawrence confessed in full, their words a torrent of regret and justification. The arrests made, the group dispersed, leaving the vicarage quiet. Slack thanked Miss Marple. "Brilliant, ma'am," she smiled. "Just seeing what's there." The village buzzed the next day, newspapers headlining the case, visits from villagers, thanks, and questions. Miss Marple and I walked the garden, discussing life's mysteries. "Unraveling is but the beginning," she said. Raymond's visit brought admiration. The chapter closed with peace, but vigilance, now assuming expanded to 3,000 words. Since I can't count here, but in practice, the full text would be written long. For the response, I will output the chapter. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. The unraveling of the mystery surrounding Colonel Protheroe's death began not with a dramatic thunderclap, but with the quiet persistence of autumn's arrival in St. Mary Mead. The leaves had started to turn, painting the landscape in hues of gold and crimson, and the air carried a chill that seemed to sharpen the senses. It was on such a day that Inspector Slack, perhaps influenced by Miss Marple's subtle suggestions, decided to assemble the key figures at the vicarage for what he described as a final clarification. His message arrived by telephone, his voice gruff over the line. 6 o'clock sharp, Clement. Bring them all. Suspects, witnesses. It's time to lay the cards on the table. Griselda, overhearing, was thrilled. A classic gathering of suspects. I'll prepare the drawing room, chairs in a circle, tea at the ready. This could be straight from a novel. I spent the morning in my study, reviewing my notes on the case, the room now free of police tape and the lingering shadow of death. The desk had been scrubbed, the carpet replaced, but memories lingered. The colonel's slumped form, the glint of the pistol. My thoughts turned to the anomalies that had plagued us, the clock's backward tick, the muffled shot, the earring's silent testimony. Miss Marple had pieced it together with her characteristic insight, drawing on parallels from the village's long history of minor scandals that mirrored larger crimes. She arrived early that afternoon, her basket laden with a sponge cake and a bunch of asters from her garden. For the table, she said, arranging the flowers with deft hands. Beauty softens harsh truths, Vicar. And today, truths will be harsh. As the hour approached, the vicarage came alive with the sound of arrivals. Anne Protheroe was the first, stepping from her car with the elegance of a woman who had learned to mask her turmoil. Her black gown clung to her figure, and her face, framed by dark hair, was pale but composed. "Vicar, Griselda," she greeted us, her voice steady. "I hope this ends the nightmare." Lettuce followed, her eyes downcast, her usual sparkle dimmed by the ordeal. "It's all so awful," she murmured, clutching her mother's arm. Lawrence Redding arrived on foot from his studio, his step firm, but his expression haggard from the strain of bail conditions. He nodded to me, his hand warm in mine. "Let's see what comes of this," he said, his tone defiant. Dr. Stone and Miss Cram came next, Stone's pipe already lit, sending puffs of smoke into the hall. "This better be quick," he barked. "The barrow won't dig itself." Cram, her sturdy frame squeezed into a tweed suit, carried a folder of notes, her face set in determination. Mr. Hawes entered quietly, his clerical garb immaculate, his recovery from his nervous episode apparent in his calm demeanor. "Blessings on this house," he said, though his eyes held a flicker of apprehension. Bill Archer tramped in, his workman's clothes muddied, his cap in hand. "Ain't sure why I'm here," he grumbled. "I didn't do it." Mrs. Lestrange glided in like a shadow, her veil partially lifted to reveal a face of quiet resolve. "I came for closure," she said simply. Griselda directed them to the drawing room, where the fire crackled cheerfully, and tea trays were laden with scones, jam, and sandwiches. The room's cozy furnishings, the floral sofa, the oak bookcases, contrasted with the tension in the air. Conversations were low, fragmented, Stone complaining about funding cuts, Hawes discussing scripture with Lettuce, Archer standing apart, nursing a cup. Inspector Slack arrived last, his uniform pressed, his mustache bristling. He took his place by the window, notebook in hand. "Let's begin," he announced, his voice echoing authority. The murder of Lucius Protheroe was no impulse. It was calculated. The body in the study, shot to the head, clock set back, note unfinished, the hard shot at 6:15, but death later. Redding's confession covered but didn't fit. Hawes's was nerves. Tonight we expose the core. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. New tests on the pistol show modification, residue suggesting suppression, a silencer, and the earring, Anne Protheroe's, lost in the room that day. Anne gasped, her hand flying to her ear. I lost it earlier, weeks ago. Slack shook his head. Lab says fresh. Someone was there. Miss Marple, seated in her customary armchair, spoke up, her voice a gentle thread in the tension. Indeed, Inspector, the truth is a tapestry woven by two, as I've seen in so many instances, the grocer's assistant and the maid who conspired to forge receipts, or the farmer's son and the neighbor who shared a poaching scheme. Alliances make the impossible feasible. Slack nodded for her to proceed. She rose, her fluffy white hair catching the firelight, her expression serene. The motives were diverse, but the act required partnership. Anne Protheroe, your marriage was a burden, the Colonel's demands suffocating. Lawrence Redding's arrival brought light, his talent, his attention. Portrait sessions became confessions, then vows. The Colonel discovered it. A letter intercepted, a meeting spied. He vowed vengeance, divorce, disinheritance, Lawrence's ruin. Lawrence interrupted. That's speculation. Miss Marple continued calmly. The plan formed in secret. Anne to strike silently, Lawrence to create illusion. The Colonel enters the study. Anne follows, entering through the side door, perhaps with a pretext of discussing the fate. At 6:22, she fires, the shot muffled by a silencer from Lawrence's studio tools, padded fabric, a metal tube to dampen sound, tested in advance. The room erupted in murmurs. Lettuce cried out, "No, it can't be." Anne's face drained of color. "You have no proof." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "The proof is in the details. You reset the clock to confuse the time. The note, started by him about church matters, left trailing to suggest despair. You exit, signaling Lawrence in the lane. He fires a blank, the loud pop heard, timed to mislead. Slack slammed his fist on the table. "The second reports, faint echoes from witnesses." Miss Marple nodded. "Exactly. Lawrence plants the pistol, confesses to protect, expecting the silencer to obscure the match. But science betrays altered powder, no loud burn." Anne collapsed into her chair, sobbing. "Stop. It's true. We couldn't live under his thumb. I shot him. Lawrence helped with the plan, the diversion." Lawrence knelt beside her. "We thought it perfect, love's escape. But guilt." Their words flowed, the studio meetings where the scheme was hatched, the silencer crafted from art supplies, the blank cartridge for noise, the confession as ultimate sacrifice. Slack called for cuffs. Murder by conspiracy. Take them. Constables moved in. The room watched in stunned silence. Stone exhaled. My name cleared. Cram packed her notes. Hawes prayed aloud. Archer smirked. Served him right. Lestrange rose. My business done. As the car drove away, the group dispersed, the night dark and starless. Griselda and I cleaned up, the room echoing empty. "What a night," she said, hugging me. "Miss Marple's genius." Slack lingered, shaking Miss Marple's hand. "You saw it all, ma'am. Owe you the case." She smiled. "Just an old spinster's hobby." The next morning, the village hummed with the news. Mrs. Price Ridley spread it at the shop. Conspiracy. Lovers in crime. Newspapers from Much Benham headlined Village Murder, solved by local sleuth. I visited Miss Marple, her cottage cozy with fire and tea. "How did you know the silencer?" I asked. She chuckled. "A parallel. The gamekeeper who muffled shots for poaching. human ingenuity repeats. Raymond West telegraphed his arrival. Coming to hear the tale. He arrived that week, pen in hand. Aunt Jane, you're the real detective. She demurred. Nonsense, observation, and nature. Lettuce came to the vicarage, tearful but relieved. Mother wrote, says forgive her. We talked of future, her plans for Old Hall. Stone's dig was shut, authorities investigating fraud. Cram left for London. Hawes found a new post, his letters a lesson in self-forgiveness. Archer returned to his ways, grudge buried. The unraveling complete, St. Mary Mead resumed its rhythm, bridge parties, garden shows. But I knew, as Miss Marple did, that threads could reknit. My sermons touched on mercy, the fragility of bonds. In her garden, Miss Marple tended roses, her mind on next puzzles. Life's mystery's endless, she said, but truth prevails. The chapter closed, but the story of human hearts continued in the quiet lanes of our village. Chapter 9. Aftermath in the village. The days immediately following the arrests of Anne Protheroe and Lawrence Redding passed in St. Mary Mead with the subdued hush that often follows a storm, the kind where the sky clears, but the ground remains sodden, and every step stirs up muddied remnants of what has been. The village, so long abuzz with speculation and fear, now exhaled collectively, as if relieved to return to its familiar rhythms of tea parties, garden committees, and the occasional squabble over cricket scores. Yet beneath the surface calm, the aftermath lingered like an uninvited guest, manifesting in whispered conversations at the post office and sidelong glances during Sunday services. I, Leonard Clement, found myself at the center of it all, my role as vicar demanding pastoral care for those touched by the tragedy, even as my own mind grappled with the moral complexities unveiled. The morning after the gathering, I awoke to a world bathed in soft sunlight, the vicarage garden sparkling with dew. Griselda was already up, humming in the kitchen as she prepared breakfast, poached eggs and toast, her way of restoring normalcy. "Len, darling," she said, sliding a plate before me, "the papers have it all. Village lovers in deadly pact. Sensational, isn't it? Poor Anne, I almost feel sorry for her." I nodded, scanning the headlines from the Much Benham Gazette, which detailed the confessions with lurid flair. The article praised Inspector Slack's dogged pursuit, but made no mention of Miss Marple's pivotal role, an oversight that amused rather than offended me. "Justice is served," I murmured, though the words tasted bittersweet. The colonel's tyranny had been real, his end violent, but the ruin of 2 lives in pursuit of freedom weighed heavily. Parish duties called me out early. My first visit was to Lettuce Protheroe at Old Hall, now a house of echoes with its master gone and its mistress in custody. The young girl met me at the door, her eyes swollen from crying, but her chin lifted in determination. "Vicar, thank you for coming," she said, leading me to the drawing room where the portraits of ancestors frowned down from the walls. The room felt colder, the fire unlit, as if the heart had gone out of the place. Lettuce poured tea with unsteady hands. "Mother wrote from the jail, says she's at peace, finally. But how can I be? Father dead, her facing the noose." Her voice broke, and I offered what comfort I could, speaking of forgiveness and the possibility of redemption. "Your father was a hard man, Lettuce, but your mother acted from despair. The courts may show mercy." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'll sell the estate, start anew in London. Acting, perhaps. The stage calls to me." As I left, I reflected on youth's resilience, how it bends but rarely breaks under such blows. The village's response was a tapestry of opinions woven in the shops and lanes. At Mrs. Leach's store, I overheard the chatter as I purchased stamps. "Shocking, it is," Mrs. Leach declared to a cluster of customers, her voice carrying over the counter. Anne Protheroe, so refined, and that artist, plotting like common criminals. Miss Marple saw through it, they say. Miss Hartnell, clutching her basket, added, "Serves the colonel right in a way. Bullied everyone. Remember how he hounded poor Hawes?" The group nodded, but Miss Weatherby sighed romantically. Love drove them to it, tragic like Romeo and Juliet, only with pistols. I cleared my throat, reminding them of charity, but their words lingered, a mirror to the community's mixed sympathies. Dr. Haydock cycled by as I walked home, dismounting to chat. "Clement, you've been through the mill. How's the parish holding?" His bluff manner hid genuine concern. We discussed the case's toll, the curate's departure for a quieter post, Stone's dig abandoned amid legal woes. "Cram's left for the city," Haydock said. "Says archaeology's lost its charm. And Archer? Back to poaching, no doubt, but with a smug grin now the colonel's gone." We parted with a handshake, his words a reminder that tragedy ripples outward, touching even the peripheries. Lunch was a simple affair, cold ham and salad, but Griselda's conversation turned thoughtful. "Len, do you think Miss Marple will visit? She's the real hero here." As if summoned, a knock sounded, and there she was. At the door, her bonnet tied neatly, a parcel under her arm. "My dear vicar, Griselda, I thought you might like some apple chutney from my trees." We welcomed her in, settling in the drawing room where the fire warded off the chill. Her eyes, bright as ever, scanned the room. "The aftermath is always the hardest part," she said, accepting tea. "The storm passes, but the debris remains." We talked at length, her insights illuminating the human, elements I'd pondered. "Anne and Lawrence," she mused, "their plan was clever, but love blinds one to flaws. Like the case of Matilda and her suitor in my youth, stole to fund an elopement, but overlooked a witness. Passion overlooks details." Griselda leaned forward. "But how did you spot the silencer?" Miss Marple smiled. "The lack of noise, my dear. The hard shot was too convenient, too loud for the fatal one. And the residue, Haydock mentioned it offhand. Parallels to a hunter's trick I once knew, muffling for stealth." She spoke of the village's healing, how gossip would fade into legend. "Mrs. Price Ridley's circle will dine on this for months, but time softens edges. Lettuce will thrive. Youth does." I asked about Mrs. Lestrange, whose revelation as the colonel's first wife had stunned us. "Ah, her," Miss Marple said. "Came for settlement, stayed for closure. No malice, just unfinished business. She's left for London. Wired me goodbye." As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple rose to leave, but paused at the window, gazing toward the churchyard. "St. Mary Mead is resilient, vicar, but watch for ripples. Tragedy stirs old grudges." Her words proved prophetic. That evening, a note arrived from Bill Archer requesting a meeting. He came after dinner, hat in hand, his rough face softened by humility. "Vicar, I ain't one for church, but the colonel's death, it freed me, but weighs heavy. He had me jailed unjustly, but murder ain't right." I listened as he unburdened, his grudge dissolving into regret. "I'll turn over a new leaf, no more snares." Whether he kept the promise, time would tell, but the confession eased his soul. The week brought more visitors. Mrs. Price Ridley called, Her indignation turned to reluctant admiration for Miss Marple. "That woman, sharp as a pin. I always suspected Anne, but the details—" She prattled on, revealing village sentiments, sympathy for lettuce, shock at the conspiracy, a quiet satisfaction that the colonel's reign ended. "No one mourns him much," she admitted, "but scandal tarnishes us all." I nodded, offering tea, and she left with a promise to organize a charity drive for the jail's inmates, her way of atoning. Dr. Stone's departure was a spectacle, his lorry loaded with crates of artifacts, Miss Cram directing with her usual vigor. They stopped at the vicarage to say goodbye. "Off to a new site in Cornwall," Stone said, shaking my hand. "This one's cursed, fraud charges pending, thanks to Protheroe's files. But we'll fight it." Cram added, "Thanks for your kindness, Vicar. The village isn't all bad." As they drove away, I wondered at their alliance, professional or more. But let it go, content with mysteries resolved. Hawes's farewell was poignant. He came for tea, his bags packed for the train. A smaller parish, Vicar, less pressure. The letters, my folly, but I've learned. We prayed together, his voice stronger. "God forgives," I said, and he smiled. "As does St. Mary Mead." Even. Mrs. Lestrange's shadow faded gracefully. A letter arrived, postmarked London. "Thank you for your discretion." The settlement came through. Protheroe's will honored old debts. I wish the village well. Enclosed was a donation for the church roof, a gesture of peace. Griselda and I took evening walks, the lanes quiet under the stars. "Life goes on," she said one night, linking arms, "but changed." Indeed, the Women's Institute buzzed with new energy. The cricket team practiced with vigor, and the Blue Boar hosted lively debates on the case. Miss Marple's nephew, Raymond West, arrived midweek, his London sophistication a contrast to our rural pace. "Aunt Jane, the tale's incredible. I must write it." We hosted dinner, Raymond quizzing Miss Marple on details. "The clock was key," she explained. "Time manipulates perception, like in the old clockmaker's fraud." Raymond scribbled notes declaring her a natural detective. She laughed. "Nonsense, just attentive to people." The aftermath brought personal growth. Griselda took up gardening, her modern ways blending with village traditions. Len, perhaps a trip to London, see lettuces play. I agreed, sensing renewal. Sunday's sermon focused on compassion, the congregation attentive. "Tragedy teaches us empathy," I said, eyes on empty pews where Protheroes sat. Afterward, villagers lingered, sharing stories, the colonel's kindnesses, forgotten amid his faults. As weeks passed, the village healed. The fate succeeded. Miss Marple's stall a hit. "Life cycle," she said, packing knitting, "from chaos to calm." But hints of new enigmas emerged. A stranger at the inn, odd letters to the postmaster. Miss Marple noted it over tea. "Shadows gather again, Vicar. But we're ready." St. Mary Mead endured, its aftermath a bridge to future tales, human nature its eternal thread. Chapter 10. A final observation. In the serene confines of Danemead Cottage, Miss Jane Marple sat in her favorite wicker chair, positioned strategically by the bay window that afforded an unobstructed view of the high street. The autumn sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting intricate patterns on the polished oak floor, much like the web of clues that had so recently ensnared the guilty in St. Mary Mead. Her knitting lay idle in her lap, a delicate lace, doily in progress, its threads as fine as the observations that had unraveled the Protheroe affair. Outside, the garden was a riot of fading colors. dahlias bowing their heads in deference to the approaching winter, and the last roses clinging stubbornly to their thorns. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp and unyielding despite her years, followed a bee as it danced from bloom to bloom, a small miracle of industry in a world prone to idleness and folly. It had been a fortnight since the arrests, and the village had begun to settle into its accustomed tranquility. The vicarage, once a hive of police activity, now hosted only the gentle routines of Leonard and Griselda Clement, morning prayers, afternoon calls, and evenings by the fire with a book or two. Griselda's laughter rang out more freely, her modern ways finding fresh outlets in plans for a parish dance, while the vicar delved deeper into his theological studies, perhaps seeking solace in eternal truths after the temporal chaos. Old Hall stood empty, its windows shuttered, awaiting Lettuce's decision on its fate. Rumors suggested a sale to a London family, bringing new blood to the parish. The Blue Boar Inn buzzed with tales of the case, the landlord embellishing details for each retelling, but even there, the excitement waned, replaced by discussions of harvest yields and the upcoming hunt. Miss Marple sighed softly, her mind drifting to the human elements that had defined the tragedy. Anne Protheroe, once a figure of quiet elegance, now faced the stark reality of a trial, her letters from jail filled with remorse that bordered on resignation. Lawrence Redding, the passionate artist, had turned introspective in custody, sketching portraits of fellow inmates as if to capture the essence of shared misfortune. Their love, so fervent and destructive, reminded her of a distant cousin's ill-fated romance with a traveling salesman, passion igniting like dry tinder, only to consume all in its path. "People do not change," she murmured to herself, resuming her knitting with a click of needles. "They merely reveal themselves under pressure." A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. It was Florence, her faithful maid, bearing a tray of tea and biscuits. "Mr. Raymond's train arrives in an hour, miss. Shall I prepare the guest room?" Miss Marple nodded, her smile warm. "Yes, Florence. And perhaps some of those lemon tarts he favors." Raymond West, her nephew, was a successful novelist from London, his visits a blend of familial duty and intellectual sparring. He delighted in teasing her about her provincial insights, little knowing how often they outshone his urban sophistication. As Florence bustled away, Miss Marple's gaze returned to the street, where Mrs. Price Ridley marched past, her umbrella wielded like a scepter. The widow had taken to organizing a memorial fund for church repairs, channeling her energies into something constructive after the scandal's dust had settled. The train from London chugged into the station promptly, and Raymond emerged, his suitcase in one hand, a bouquet of hothouse flowers in the other. He was a tall man in his 30s, with a fashionable mustache and a penchant for tailored suits that set him apart from the villagers' tweeds and cottons. "Aunt Jane," he exclaimed, embracing her at the cottage gate. "You look as spry as ever, and the garden, magnificent." Miss Marple accepted the flowers with grace, leading him inside where the tea table awaited. "You're too kind, Raymond, but come, tell me of London, the theaters, the galleries. Life here is quiet, as you know." Over tea, the conversation inevitably turned to the recent events. Raymond's eyes lit with curiosity as he leaned forward. "Quiet? Aunt Jane, the papers are full of it. Murder in Sleepy Village, and you at the heart, unraveling it like one of my plots. You must tell me everything. It could inspire my next book, a spinster sleuth in a quaint hamlet, outwitting the police. Miss Marple chuckled, her blue eyes twinkling. Flattery, my dear. I'm no sleuth, merely an observer. But if you insist— She recounted the tale with meticulous detail, starting from the Colonel's unwelcome dinner at the Vicarage, through the web of motives among the villagers, to the fatal shot and the clever misdirection of the silenced weapon and the staged confession. Raymond listened rapt, interrupting occasionally with questions. The clock set back, brilliant. And the second shot as a diversion? Aunt Jane, your mind is a marvel. How did you see through it? She sipped her tea, her expression modest. Experience, Raymond. Village life is a microcosm of the world. Greed, jealousy, love twisted into hate. I've seen it all before. The jealous wife in Mrs. Hargreaves's day, poisoning her husband's tea to run off with the gardener, or the curate who forged documents to hide his debts, much like poor Hawes's letters to himself. Patterns repeat if one watches closely. He pressed for more, his notebook emerging from his pocket. And the alliances? You mentioned pairs committing evil. Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. Indeed, seldom does one act alone in such matters. Anne and Lawrence complemented each other, her access to the victim, his ingenuity with the silencer from his art supplies. It's like the baker and the miller years ago, colluding to short-weight flour, each covering the other's tracks until a sharp-eyed customer noticed the discrepancy. Raymond scribbled furiously. Incredible. You're wasted here, Aunt Jane. Come to London. You could consult on cases. She shook her head firmly. Nonsense. My place is in St. Mary Mead, with my knitting and my garden. London is too noisy. One misses the subtleties. As evening fell, they dined on Florence's roast chicken and vegetables, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. Raymond's latest novel, a thriller set in the Riviera, and his fiancée Joan's interest in modern art. She'd love your insights on human nature, he said. Miss Marple smiled enigmatically. Perhaps, but art, like life, often conceals more than it reveals. After dinner, they sat by the fire, Raymond coaxing more details from the case. The sneeze Griselda heard, that was the intruder hiding? Precisely, Miss Marple confirmed. A small sound, but telling, like the cough that betrayed the thief in the old rectory burglary. Raymond retired early, pleading fatigue from the journey, but Miss Marple lingered by the window, her mind alert. The high street was deserted, the lamps casting pools of light on the cobbles. A new family had moved into the cottage near the school, a Mr. and Mrs. Enderby, with a daughter of marriageable age. Whispers had already reached her. The husband, a retired banker with a mysterious limp, the wife, fond of bridge but evasive about her past, and the daughter, pretty but with a restless air, often seen walking alone toward the woods. Secrets, Miss Marple murmured. They arrive with every newcomer. She recalled a similar arrival decades ago, a couple fleeing debts, their facade cracking under village scrutiny. Human nature, she thought, as predictable as the seasons. The next morning dawned bright, and Raymond joined her for a walk along the lanes, where blackberry bushes heavy with fruit bordered the path. He picked a few, offering them with a grin. Sweets from nature, better than London's confections. They discussed the aftermath, Lettice's departure for London, her letters full of excitement about auditions, the curate's new parish, where he thrived without pressure, even Archer's reformed ways, spotted attending church sporadically. The village heals, Raymond observed, but you, Aunt Jane, you're its quiet guardian. she demurred. Merely an old spinster with time on her hands, but observation is a habit, like knitting. One stitch leads to another. They paused at the churchyard gate, the spire rising against the blue sky. Raymond gazed at the graves, some weathered by time. So much history here, stories untold. Miss Marple nodded. Every stone a tale, like the Enderbys, new but already intriguing. The husband avoids doctor, Haydock, yet limps badly, and the wife's jewelry. Fine, but perhaps too fine for a banker's widow. Raymond laughed. See, you're at it again. A limp jewels. Next it'll be murder. She smiled faintly. One hopes not, but puzzles brew in the quietest corners. Lunch was a leisurely affair, with Florence serving cold meats and salad. Raymond entertained with London anecdotes, a playwright's feud, a gallery scandal involving forged paintings. Art forgers, clever lot, he said. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. Like our Lawrence, talent misused. But forgery, my dear, is as old as ambition. Remember the silversmith who copied heirlooms for quick cash, exposed by a flaw in the hallmark? Raymond leaned in. You should write your memoirs, Aunt Jane's Village Chronicles. She waved it off. Too indiscreet. Besides, who'd believe an old woman's ramblings? The afternoon brought visitors, Griselda Clement, arriving with a basket of jams. Miss Marple, Raymond, how lovely. Len sends regards. He's buried in sermons. They chatted about the case's echoes, the parish fund thriving without the colonel's interference, the Women's Institute planning a bazaar. And the new Enderbys, Griselda said, eyes sparkling. Mrs. Enderby joined our bridge group, sharp player, but evasive about her family. Says they're from Manchester, but her accent's southern. Miss Marple's interest piqued. Indeed? And the daughter? Griselda leaned closer. Seen with young Tom from the farm, whispers of romance. But she seems distracted, like she's hiding something. Raymond grinned. Another mystery. Aunt Jane's on the case. Miss Marple chuckled. Mere curiosity, but young love often conceals complications. Griselda departed with promises of dinner invitations, leaving Raymond to tease his aunt. You can't help it, can you? Seeing patterns everywhere. She admitted it with a sigh. A lifetime's habit. St. Mary Mead may seem sleepy, but it's a world in miniature, ambitions, secrets, the same as any city. As evening drew near, Raymond prepared for his return train, his notebook filled with notes. This visit's been gold, Aunt Jane. My next book's heroine, modeled on you. She embraced him at the station. Be kind to her, dear, and visit soon. As the train pulled away, she walked home slowly, the setting sun casting long shadows. The Enderby cottage lights glowed, a silhouette at the window. Mrs. Enderby, perhaps, watching the street. Curious, Miss Marple thought. That limp, war wound, or accident? And the jewels, inheritance or ill-gotten? Back at Dane Mead, Florence had supper ready, shepherd's pie and apple crumble. Over the meal, Miss Marple shared village news with her maid, who nodded knowingly. That Enderby lot. Odd, miss. The girl was at the shop, buying headache powders. Nervous type. Miss Marple filed it away, her mind connecting dots. Nerves often hide deeper troubles, like Anne's distraction before the murder. Night fell, and in her bedroom, Miss Marple sat by the lamp. Knitting resumed. The village slept, but her thoughts wandered to the world's woes mirrored in its quiet streets. Greed in the colonel's feuds, passion in the lover's plot, fear in Hawes's letters. A microcosm, she whispered, and I its observer. As a new puzzle brewed with the Enderbys, A missing brooch reported the next day, fingers pointing subtly. She knew her vigilance would be needed once more. St. Mary Mead, for all its serenity, was alive with human drama, and Miss Jane Marple, its unassuming sentinel. The seasons turned, winter's frost giving way to spring's promise, but the guardian remained, her china blue eyes ever watchful.